Hello, everyone. This is Alex from Alex's Autism Acceptance Channel. Wherever you are watching in the world, hope you're having a wonderful day or night. Today, I am here with Rebekah J Samuel. She is a great friend of mine that I've known for several years now. And today, she is going to talk with me about her experiences with discrimination in the church because of her autism and how the church can potentially change that. So, thanks for being here, Rebekah.
No problem. It's great to be here again.
It absolutely is, yes. So what denomination, if any, did you grow up in, and which denomination are you in now?
So I grew up charismatic and Assembly of God. That came from a branch off of Catholicism.
Okay,
My dad was Catholic, and then he gave his life to Jesus later in his life. And so there was a lot of Catholic charismatic influence in my upbringing.
gotcha.
Yeah. And I also experienced some growing up. It's kind of funny. My parents took us to a lot of different types of churches. Like we never really had a home church that we settled in, but we were exposed to a lot of different types of denominations growing up because my family enjoyed the culture of church and church
Yeah.
backgrounds.
Hmm.
So we were in a Jewish church one time. We like fellowshipped with the Jewish people. We were in an all black church at one point in time. Um, we were in Baptist church. So we would visit my grandparents' Baptist church from time to time. We did home churching. So we experienced that as well. And there's another one that I'm not remembering the name of, but we did like a lot of very open style churches. So like backyard Bible club churches and stuff like that too. So
Awesome, yeah. And
yeah.
what denomination are you in right now?
I'm non-denominational,
Okay.
but I lean more towards LCMS Lutheran, which
Mhm.
is Lutheran Missouri Synod version of the Lutheran branch.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my home church is a mega church, but my school church is Lutheran, and I do like a lot of what they have to say. So
Yeah, I like it because of the structure of it.
yes,
I
me
think
too.
that it brings in a lot of, not throwing out traditions, but kind of, bringing those traditions forefront. The thing I like about the non-denominational church I go to right now, Faith Covenant Church of Sneads Ferry, North Carolina, that church is amazing because the pastor understands enough about Martin Luther, where the
Mm-hmm.
Lutheran church came from, to incorporate some of that liturgical teaching into our services. So even though it's not a Lutheran service or a Lutheran church, it has little bits and pieces of influence in there. And it really, speaks to me when I hear, him speaking in such a way or bringing up Martin Luther or something like that in his
Sure.
sermons. Not all
Yeah,
the time, but,
yeah.
has some influences.
Yep. So what have you personally experienced that led you to believe that the church has some problems with accepting autism?
So I found out about my autism a few years ago. And my experience with it at first was pretty good because of the worship team. They're the first ones that I told at my church that I think I'm autistic, and they actually were able to help confirm that because one of the worship team members on the worship team was a teacher of people on the autism spectrum, like their
Oh, okay.
kids and
Yeah.
parents. So she did assessments and things like that. And actually, she did an assessment with me to just something that she usually does to kind of gauge if somebody might be on the spectrum. And that kind of solidified it for me. But so they were very accepting of my gifts in music because of it. It was
Gotcha.
helping the worship team out a
Yeah,
lot
yeah, yeah.
because I could hear every individual instrument and sound, and if somebody was off key, so it paid off really well in a worship team, and it always has. But I had some trouble with understanding from the pastor himself, I feel like just some comments that were said about other autistics that I knew were autistic in the church were disturbing to me because
Was it
these were
almost like gossip?
no, it wasn't. It was more of like there were autistics that wanted to volunteer in church. Like they
Mm,
wanted to be part of whatever it was that I had going in a leadership team. But they were autistics that had, more advanced autism than I do with high functioning. And
right,
so they struggled a little bit in, like doing slides and stuff like that, but they loved it.
right.
So when I proposed to the pastor and said, I would love to work with them. I think we need to give them a chance to practice this. I think they could get really good at it and they would be an awesome addition to our team if they're given the chance. Um, I was pretty much met with, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to take a different route. And um, they were just like suddenly not allowed to be scheduled anymore.
Oh, that doesn't sound very inclusive at all.
No, and it's sad because this particular church that I was at was very big about like having autistic people there. There was a lot of autistic people there, and it was almost like it was an inconvenience to the rest of the service when they would do their things that they
Wow.
needed to do, their stimming, or if they weren't fast enough on the sliders or, the slideshow or the
Yeah.
slide things. Um, so yeah, I got a bad taste in my mouth. And I was like kind of a little shocked. Like I thought we're supposed to be a church that's inclusive and build community that includes autistics as well, like from my perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so is there something that the church doctrine says about autism, or is it like the personal attitudes of specific people in power at the church?
That's a really great question. No, there isn't anything that really addresses it.
Okay.
Maybe they could get lumped in as a disability.
Mm,
So we might get lumped in as a, here are disabled congregants or something like that, but not anything specific to autism. And I used to talk to the pastor of this particular church about autism and what I do with autistics and my
mhm.
ministry with them. And he just dismissed it. Like it wasn't
Wow.
that big of a deal, it wasn't that important to him. And then I tried to also bring in a sound room space for our
Oh, so
autistics.
for sensory stuff?
Yes, for
Yeah,
our autistics that were having sensory issues and not even coming to church. There was a lot of autistics not even showing up at church because of how loud everything was in the sanctuary. Well,
sure.
there was this one room off of the church, right? And this is where I was like, okay, we can be inclusive to our disabled or whatever you want to call them congregants by taking the room that's not even being used. It just has stuff in it. And
Hmm.
it was supposed to be the nursery. There's no babies here and we're just packing it with things. But this would be perfect to have autistics in for when they need to, get away for the sensory um, challenges that they're having during service or during the worship or something. And that was dismissed as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So no, nothing really in the bylaws or the doctrine of the church that was accommodating.
Now, do you think that was just unintentional ignorance, or was that like blissful, like intentional?
I think it's a little bit of both. I
Okay.
think there is this idea of we want to be so inclusive and be reaching out to our community, but it's almost like, but if it's inconvenient, like, and this isn't
Mm,
all churches,
hmm.
but I noticed this happens a lot in bigger churches than smaller community churches. Like my church is amazing at accepting autism. We
Right.
are really working on a lot of different things. I'm working with the pastor on it too. And he's been the first one to listen. Like, wow, okay, I didn't know this was a thing that is happening, but I can see it happening, knowing how pastors can be and how
Sure. Yeah.
this demographic is. So yeah, my church is awesome. But this other church that was really rough, of an experience. I lost track of what I was saying. Help me, Alex. I
Uh,
lost track what I was
we
answering.
we were talking about, like, do you think it's just ignorance, or do you think they're doing that
Thank you.
intentionally? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think
Okay.
that it can be seen as an inconvenience, like, oh, we have to do all these extra things to accommodate. And maybe it's a matter of budget. We don't have the budget for it, or we don't want to prioritize it. If we have to build extra rooms or extra, parts off of a sanctuary, or cut out space, for a sensory room or something like that. And then also, I think it is ignorance. I think it is not pastors not educating on autism. And it's kind of a newer thing at the same time. There's been a lot of misinformation put out there about it. So when a pastor goes and Googles it, what is autism?
Oh,
we
that's complicated.
that's our that's a huge problem, because
Mhm.
you're getting Google, here's the tech side of things. Google's putting articles up at the top that they want
Right.
people to read.
And I get the most views. So there could be a totally, like, incoherent article that gets lots of views, and that's what
E
they put in.
exactly.
So
So
yeah.
so then that's what they're looking at. They're
Mhm.
checking the first top 5 articles or something, reading about it, and then hearing, "Oh, it's an illness. Oh, it's something that it
Oh, and it's
isn't."
to be cured, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It can be cured if you have treatment, and so then it's like, "Oh, well, just go get it treated and don't inconvenience us."
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. That's a great answer. I never thought about that. Um, so do you think that the church should view autism not based on what the Bible says, but by, like, personal experience and common sense?
Well, I think let me think about this for a second. I wanna make sure I say this well.
Mhm.
I think that the Bible does talk about our individuality and our uniqueness and how we are created.
True.
Um, this seems to be the theme of the week. I have been quoting Psalm 139 all week long in my life
Yes,
coaching.
that is,
I
yeah.
mean, it's just the thing right now. And Psalm 139 talks about how we have been knitted in our mother's womb, right? We have been created so uniquely. There's not another copy of us out there.
Mhm.
So if you imagine that, you have billions and billions and billions of people in the world, and none of them have the same DNA, have the same blueprint, have the same fingerprint.
Mhm.
And that's incredible to think about. Because if God has created us so uniquely, that means every single person on this earth is not a mistake. It doesn't
Yes.
matter how they were created, how they were born. God designed them that way. He had that as the blueprint from before they even had a formed body shape, before they
Yeah.
were even a fetus. And if we look at autism from that perspective, that's a neurological uh, direction as well, right? That he made our brains the way they are, and how we think and how we operate. So for us to say autism isn't in the Bible, it may not have the word autism or God created autistic people,
Mhm.
but just by Psalm 139, we can say God created people with disabilities of any kind, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And
um,
if there's one person who doesn't make mistakes, it's God.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
think if the church could really get behind that idea and understanding
Mhm.
of that, because we read that scripture all the time.
Yeah,
It's like,
there's quite a difference between reading it and actually believing it. I, a lot of leaders in the church, even they don't believe everything that the Bible says. I've found out, because they tend to dismiss certain verses from what I've seen.
yeah, and it's an epidemic
Yeah.
with the Bible. And if we're only working from an experience, if we are only believing truth or forming truth from experiences, like what you asked is common sense and personal experience. Everybody has a different experience.
Fair,
So
yeah.
I could meet an autistic person and they are the most horrible person to talk to, right? Because of sinfulness, right? In
Yeah.
anybody, right? And then I could
Mhm.
meet an autistic person and they're the most wonderful person I've ever spoken with. For me, that experience is that person was mean to me and awful, and this person over here was wonderful, but they're both autistic. And so now I've formed an experience of autism from those two experiences, right?
Mm. I agree completely. That makes sense. Yeah.
But I'm coming at it from a Christian point of view, from a biblical point of view, using the word of God as my foundation of truth, then I'm going to see the person who was awful, horrible, and say, okay, they're really dealing with a lot of sin in their life. So what can I do to help them? What can I do to encourage them and teach them truth?
Absolutely. Um, so I am attending a mega church right now, and by God's grace, I have experienced no discrimination.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah,
That's
praise God
awesome.
for that. What
Mhm.
is your theory as to why this is
Oh,
with the mega church?
that's a good question.
Hmm.
Um, I think that churches are getting slowly on board with acceptance
Hmm.
of all people, and it's kind of ironic that that's happening because I think it's autistics and autism are starting to get lumped in with the entire movement of acceptance of all people, the LGBTQ community, and all of that is kind of
Absolutely.
bringing awareness to this. Um, and I'm not going to talk about LGBTQ or my views on that, not in this broadcast, but it is bringing attention to how much discrimination in our country we are doing. And I think that that is causing the church to kind of open up a little bit about how we've been treating people in general,
Right.
right?
Because you know what I found is that the church tends to reject what society does, and rightfully
Mhm,
so.
mhm.
So I think since they see discrimination, they want to do the exact opposite of that. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like once you see it and your eyes are open to it, you have to deal with it. You have to
Hmm.
deal with the truth of it. And with you, I know that you kind of live near college town. So there's this other side of this as well.
Yep.
Um, yes.
Well, I'm sorry. The mega church is in my home church, which is a pretty settled. It's in a pretty settled down city. Like it's not a
Oh,
college
okay.
town. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so the other thing I was going to say is sometimes the demographics of the people that are in a congregation can
Hmm.
also determine whether it's how accepting the city is itself. Because if you have all these people that are more accepting of something like that and they all come and gather, like my church, right? They're very used to people who are autistic. So there is no reason for us to discriminate with anybody, right? So our church
Right.
is very accepting. And I think it has something to do with that too. You don't find the acceptance as readily if you are in a city or an area location that doesn't know what it is and is not educated. You're
Mm,
going to end
right.
up with a group of people who have no idea. And actually, this can happen more in older congregations more than younger congregations. If your congregation, even if it's in a mega church, is a younger demographic, most likely there's more acceptance there because we're learning in all of the areas that we are involved in, we're learning more about autism.
Yeah.
But people in the older demographic are still new to this whole concept, and that's where I think a lot of the hurt, the church hurt, and the faith discrimination against autistics comes from,
Okay.
because of the misunderstanding of what it means, especially with what they were taught. It's a
Yeah.
different era completely.
Yeah. Going a bit off of like where you're from, are there like specific parts of the country that think differently than other parts, or like have you noticed anything geographically?
I don't have any statistics on that
Okay.
per se, but I think that it's fair enough to say, as a theory, that again, those regions of where the church is located can have a lot to do with it, especially depending on the education access
I agree.
that area has, right? So inner cities tend to have a lot more access and more involvement versus a little old country church, right?
I agree with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, like my church seats 3,000. So I mean, there's a lot of people there with a lot of different stories to share, and like when you're in part of the country, like everyone has the same lifestyle basically.
Yeah.
So having something different come along can be a bit of a shock to them.
Culture is everything too.
Yes.
Demographics between cultural divides as well can make a lot of difference on education of autism. I think I understand without saying it, without giving details, I can understand why this pastor struggled with understanding what autism is,
Okay.
because he wouldn't have been educated in autism based on where he's grown up and his life experiences. He would not
Yeah.
have ever come across it as labeled as autism, like, oh, that's what this is. It would have been, oh, they're weird, they're strange, I don't know, they got something wrong with them. Do you see what I'm saying? That's
Yeah,
like where
I
those
totally see it.
labels, that's where those labels come from, and those ways of descriptors, those descriptors come from that a lot of the
Yeah.
time. Mhm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Um, so people in the Catholic Church, oh, I get mad just saying this. They've
Aw.
directly told me that God can help you overcome autism. Um, Obviously, that incorrectly assumes that God did not create us with a very important purpose by giving us this, right? So what can like non-denominational Christians do to help them change their attitude on this?
Okay. So I've heard that too, and it has
Mhm.
been said to me as well
Yeah,
by people,
it's yeah.
not just Catholics, but Christians have said that, like, oh, honey, it's okay. You don't even have to like acknowledge your autism. You don't need to think
See,
about it. You don't need to say
I,
anything
I
about
I
it.
apologize. I've just only experienced that in the Catholic Church.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
only.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah. So again, this comes back to the education. A lot of Catholic churches tend to have older congregations, older
Okay.
demographics, right? And they come from very traditional roots and backgrounds
Hmm.
of their faith, because the Catholic Church has a lot of charismatic roots, a lot of illnesses and flaws in a human being are attributed often to a demonic influence.
Hmm.
And so, what it translates to is if you're sick, if you're ill, if you have an illness, some Catholic churches, not all, but some have this thought that it must be a demonic related thing. That's where you end up with the behaviors such as meltdowns, the what is the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word, but the way that autistics express themselves can sometimes get confused with not just the Catholic Church, but people in the church in general, with this connection to, well, they must have a demon or they're dealing with a demon. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
So when you say God can help you overcome autism, they're thinking, and this is really wrong thinking, it's not correct. It's needs to be educated.
Hmm.
But they're thinking that this person must have a demon, and if they have a demon, there must be some kind of sin in their life, and so they can overcome sin. That's really what they're saying.
Interesting. I've
Yeah.
never thought about that before. Absolutely. That definitely clears a whole lot up. Um, yeah, and looking back on it, like there were some examples of that, like people acting out, and that being related to demons a whole lot.
Yes, because they don't understand a meltdown, what's happening in the brain neurologically. And if you think about it, people at that age demographic didn't have the science access and education that we have today.
Yeah.
So they're looking at it as what they see and experience and making a judgment on what they see.
Totally.
A lot of us today, us younger people, with this demographic of education and this age of education, we're looking into the neuroscience. We're looking into what's happening neurologically, what's
Right.
happening in the brain, and scientifically when somebody is going through a meltdown, what's happening there, not what's happening right here in front of me.
I'd say people are taking a lot more time to get to know our own stories than they used
Mhm.
to.
Yes, I really do believe that the church is listening a little more. Maybe they don't fully understand it, but when they are listening, that is really good strides. That's forward movement. If a church
Absolutely.
isn't listening, that's between them and God. That's what I
Yeah.
say. Like if
And that raises red flags to leave them.
it may be a time to exit that church because that church might be very toxic in how they're dealing with the people in the church, the congregations in the church. I never encourage someone to leave your church, family, or your community. But if you have a weird feeling about it, like a gut feeling that something just doesn't feel right here, or you're feeling like you as a person are being devalued in some way, might be time to examine the truths that are being spoken to you, the truths that are being spoken to you, and seek out a more accepting, loving church that is not going to dismiss sin in your life. You don't want that. You want a healthy church that's going to call out when you're not walking with the Lord as a Christian. But you don't want somebody who's condemning you. There's a difference between
Yes.
encouragement and condemnation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So final question here.
Okay.
If non-supporting neurotypical Christians stumble across this video one day, what would you like to say to them directly?
Okay, if non-supporting neurotypical Christians stumble across this video, what would I like to say to them? Did I get that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I would say in the past, the church has been very vocal about their opinions and their views. And a lot has changed since then. A lot of information and education has come out, even biblical education and understanding and interpretations, right? And also denominational understanding of where did these denominations come from and what did they form from in the first place. We've been very vocal over the years, and I think it's an age and it's a time to listen, to listen to what we are saying, to not dismiss it right away, but really examine it. And because I don't think that the people today who are talking about autism and talking about disabilities and re-looking at, is it really demon related whenever we have disabilities or struggles or challenges? Is it really fully that, connection
Yeah.
with these things? We have definitely made a lot of strides forward in understanding how those types of belief systems were being used to abuse people and control people. And a lot of us in this generation are waking up to the abuse. We are realizing what's been happening to us over the years, and we are taking a stand for it and saying it's not okay. It's okay. It's healthy to have a boundary. It's healthy to speak up about this and say that it's not okay and you can't control us like that anymore. Jesus wouldn't do that to us. So,
And neither should you. Yep.
and neither should you. And it's not even a should, because I don't like to use that word should because that even has some abusive connotation to it. but we can work better together by listening to what we're saying,
Oh,
examining it thoroughly, and we can find some unity in the old and the new, right? The traditional and the contemporary. I think that there's a balance there in the middle. So yeah, I would encourage people who are coming across this video who are non neurotypical Christians not understanding autism to really listen to our cry, to be heard and understood, and do your research, but don't just Google it. Talk to the autistics, talk to us, talk to those of us who are advocating, who are
mhm.
Christians, who are in the church, to hear what our experiences have been. And then the other thing I would say is believe us. You can hear us, you can listen to us, but if you don't believe us, then change will never happen.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better myself. Spot on, Rebecca, as always.
Aw, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, that concludes the interview. I really appreciate you coming on. You had some wonderful things to say, and I hope people see this and it will either enhance their idea of what it means to be autistic, or it will change/improve that.
I hope so too. That's what I pray for.
All righty. Well, you have a wonderful rest of your night.
All right.